We will be recording and disseminating this to our participants that unfortunately can't join us live today. So during discussions, if you prefer, you don't have to turn your camera on or identify yourself, but if you're happy to, please do so. So for those that are new, my name is Bree, and I'm the Operations Manager at Resilient Services, and I'll be facilitating today's session. Today's session is on COVID's impacts to emergency and disaster management. Now, whilst this topic isn't inherently about women, I thought it might be interesting to have somewhat of a roundtable or idea share on the ways in which we've had to change our processes, procedures, and work habits to accommodate this virus, and even discuss our thoughts on those changes and what we think will carry far into the future. I'm hoping we'll all be able to learn something from each other here and use our brain's trust to highlight things we may not have considered, which may need to be considered, and which considering may help elevate our careers. Now, I'm going to apologise. I do have a bit of a croaky voice at the moment. That's just, I think, from sleeping with the heater on so high because it was so freezing in Melbourne last night. But if I do need to excuse myself for a sip of water, I do apologise for that in advance. Now, I'm not going to sit here and lecture you on COVID-19 or pandemic management. I think we're all very well aware of what COVID-19 is and the impacts that it and the subsequent lockdowns and restrictions have had on people all over the world. We're all aware of the economic hardships being faced worldwide due to this pandemic, the impact on mental health and mental health resources, the surge in people accessing domestic and family violence resources, not to mention the infections, hospitalizations, deaths, and subsequent fear. Of course, we're also aware of the conspiracy theories, the protests, and the manifesto advising the public that they don't have to comply with requests from the police. It's been an interesting time to say the very least. But conspiracy theorist, believer, or otherwise, the impacts are what are undeniable. If you want to blame the virus, okay. Want to blame the government? Sure. Want to blame the sheep that believe the virus is real and don't heed your warnings about 5G? Well, that's a little less okay in my opinion, but each to their own. But what I want to know is, have you considered all of the ways this virus has changed what you do in the space of emergency and disaster management right now and into the future? Have you also considered the background work that is going to need to go into making, approving, and training on those changes? This is ultimately what we want to discuss today. We can digress and discuss some of the other stuff along the way, but if you find me digressing too much, because I can be a bit of a chatter, please hold me accountable to the task at hand. So I want you all to think about one thing in your role that has had to change because of the virus. If I can have one of our participants start us off, tell us what's changed, how it's changed, and the ongoing impact of that change. Okay, well, I'll get us started. Some of the things that I've considered, not just in my work as a consultant in the industry, but also the things that may impact you, are business continuity planning and response, emergency and crisis planning and response, incident management response and planning, pandemic response, definitely, that one might be obvious, after action or post-incident reviews, emergency exercises, work from home directives, office security, site security. Anyone got anything to add to that list?
What about emergency cleaning protocols? Have you had to change the structure of the toolbox meetings, start of the day briefings for on-site field workers? Training, is anyone in your company following up with at-home workers to ensure their at-home workspace meets WH&S standards or requirements? Or checking in with Vic-based parents to see how much wine they are drinking to get through homeschooling whilst working every day?
That's a really good point, Sam. I know the wine intake in this household has probably gone up a little bit with the homeschooling.
Yep.
Yeah, playing mummy, teacher, and worker has been a very interesting thing to tackle during this pandemic, and I know I'm definitely not alone in that. So look, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Some of the things we're going to discuss may be under your purview, where some may not. But if a company isn't doing them, they probably should be. And it could be an opportunity to raise and address a potential risk before it's actually realised. Okay, so let's take a closer look at some of these things now. So what we've done here is just list the different kinds of things that I think have changed or have had to change, and then where they were before COVID-19 happened, and now where they are and where they could potentially stay. And look, this isn't just restricted to emergency and disaster management. I know that this particular virus and the way that it's been handled has really impacted every part of our working lives and our home lives. So you can really take this process and look at every different thing you do and sort of see what you think will be taken into the future, what you want to take into the future, and what we'd really like to leave behind, like lockdown and homeschooling. So I'll start off with business continuity management. So, because that happens to be my area of expertise. So before COVID, a business continuity plan wasn't really designed for prolonged use. It was mostly just something that could be activated for potentially a month or two at best. And well, now we've seen some companies have had their business continuity plans activated since the end of January. So we're at almost like 10 months and counting. Recovery office location provisions for most departments were always a consideration of a business continuity plan before. We saw that people would have offices that basically sat in hibernation and they were rented for a nominal fee that they would only ever use in the event that they were required. Well, what we've discovered through COVID is a lot more people can work from home than anyone originally thought. So a lot of those recovery office locations are no longer required and people just go straight to work from home now. We've seen new IT systems implemented and needing to be added to plans. We've also seen them implemented in a hurry, which can have its own set of risks because sometimes that risk analysis wasn't quite up to scratch before it was just added simply because it was required. And that's something that needed to be done afterwards. Again, before COVID-19, there was really on-site management of any business continuity event, and that seems to be the same with any type of event, whether we're talking emergency and crisis management or incident management, whatever it was all done from a central point, a room. Now we've got the virtual tools and people are managing this from home. So teams are collaborating over video conferencing technologies like Zoom, like Teams, and they're actually managing to really control these and respond to these incidents from their own home. And I think that that's been a really, really big change. Also before COVID, particularly with business continuity, supply chains weren't heavily scrutinised. They weren't really a big feature. Well, since this, with the border closures and the postal interruptions, I know I personally have waited over 4 weeks for a package from the next suburb over. So since that has happened, a lot of customers are now demanding BCPs from their suppliers to ensure that their supply chain won't be disrupted in another event. So that's also been a huge change. If we then look at emergency and crisis management, you'll see some of the things are similar, like on-site management has become management from home. But there was also the necessity before for roll boxes, tabards, physical plans, and physical items all to be in a room. Well, that's now moved to digital management, which has created more work for some people and less for others. Most team members were already in the office during business hours, which made getting together a lot easier to manage an event. Well, now, if you require them to come into the office, you've got to take into account that commute, which can really push back the start of the management of the incident. We didn't see density requirements really before. It was room capacity only. So if you had a boardroom, well, you could have as many people in there as the room could handle. But now, particularly here, we've got limits on the amount of personal space people need and how much distance you need between you and the PPE that needs to be involved if you are in a room with other people, and the recording requirements of everyone that was in that room at that particular moment, just in case. And beforehand, we saw a backup team leader would often be assigned. Now what we're seeing is people need entire backup teams, just in case one member is suspected of having COVID, particularly if they are in the one room together. With incident management, what we're talking here is obviously more site-based management. Beforehand, there was more available field and site workers, but I realise a lot of people have gone back to work in the last week or so in Melbourne, but there's still some industries that are being impacted by the stage 4 restrictions on workers. So a lot of people, a lot of sites have less people than they would have with less expertise potentially. We used to have muster points or evacuation assembly points, and people would stay there until further information came in, crowding together. Well, obviously now we can't do that with social distancing. You can't have people all mustered in the one small area. So it's a matter of get their details and send them on. But then how do you communicate with them? And if you do send them away from the site, how do you get them back once it is safe? So there's all that communication that needs to be considered. Beforehand, PPE was only required if the situation was hazardous. Well, obviously PPE, different types of PPE are now required all the time. And that's been a huge adjustment for a lot of companies. Again, you have your backup supervisor, but now we've got entire backup teams. And you usually had shift changeover depending on whether it was, a 9 to 5 facility or a 24-hour facility. You'd have shift changeover once or twice per day. Well, now with shifts needing to be staggered, so people come in at all different times, so you don't have people congregating in areas, that's really impacted the amount of shift changeover, the amount of toolbox meetings, things like that. And then if you've got a shift changeover happening at the same time as an incident, how does that affect an incident? These are all the things that really need to be considered. Pandemic management I'll gloss over because it's a little bit obvious given what we're going through at the moment. And as I said before, it used to be a very minor part in some business continuity plans, but now it's its own detailed plan that's been updated to reference and include government restrictions and recommendations. There's sub-plans for on-site, field workers, different offices, people that are out driving, salespeople. Everyone needs its own sub-plan to manage what they actually do. A lot of them are now aligned to the WHO pandemic levels. So there tends to be one sort of overarching way of dealing with it and classifying a pandemic, whereas before it was more focused on a gastro outbreak at one particular location or an influenza outbreak, which was slightly easier to contain than a COVID outbreak. And now it used to be business continuity teams that would activate your pandemic plan, but now there's specialist teams, there's health teams, there's health management teams, and there's different people required to be in the room, administer the plan and make sure it's all going to plan. I touched briefly before on post-incident reviews. Well, they used to be held shortly after an event that maybe lasted hours to weeks maximum. Well, now that needs to be adjusted for an event lasting 8, 9, 10 months. We could be up to 2 years by the time that these things are done. And some teams or some streams may have been stood down for 6 months or more prior to the review. And how are they going to remember what happened if you use your old way of doing things? It used to be short, targeted interviews and questionnaires, but now it needs to debrief and unpack over half a year of action items and activations of what went well, what went wrong, what needs to be done differently. How do you capture all of that in a short interview? It's impossible. And it used to be a one-off review with everyone in the room all at the same time. Well, some companies, and I actually think this is one of those really good ideas, some companies are now filming 2-minute debriefs at the end of every week or fortnight with key people so that it can be really accurate. And those thoughts that are happening at the time, what worked well, what didn't, that's all captured for future. And it allows all the changes that need to be made without only focusing on the things that you can remember from 6 months before. So the next one is emergency exercises. This is something I think everyone will be very familiar with. And it's had a lot of the same changes as emergency and crisis management, but they were generally pre-scheduled throughout the year. And well, everyone's schedules have been completely upended as we try and figure out how to manage this thing. It used to be that a scenario was presented generally in a crisis room and facilitated face-to-face. Well, now, for obvious reasons, we've gone to a more virtual way of doing it. So running an event or an emergency simulation over a Zoom type structure and having all the participants gather their information that way and then disseminate and bring back information that way, which is very different to how it was done before. Observers used to be invited. I ran some partially live exercises with multiple teams activated, and we had police, people from the police there. We had people from the EPA there, people that were stakeholders who wanted to see how the response went, but who also had some interest in it for a good reason. Well, now obviously they're not allowing any unnecessary personnel on location. So it makes observing a little bit more difficult. And emergency exercises generally weren't related to health before. They were slightly more operational, I should say. Well, now there's a lot of COVID scenario testing. I think every site with critical infrastructure had to run COVID tests to see whether their management was up to scratch and they were able to deal with an outbreak. Again, we've had the work from home directives. I know all of us are currently working from home. And before, it was sort of nice to have flex options available. Well, now it's kind of government mandated, which is different. So it kind of allowed for part-time work from home before COVID. Well, now it's full-time, long-term. I mean, we've all been at home for, I can't even count how many months at this point. And beforehand, communications were limited to phone and email, but now obviously there's different IT systems, new IT systems, secure video conferencing capabilities. So I'll move through the next couple quite quickly so we can get into some conversation. So obviously office security has changed because before the focus was on keeping the people in the building safe and the building itself safe. Well, now a lot of the focus is on keeping people out of the building as much as possible. Site security, same sort of thing. Let's get as few people on site as we could possibly run with. And you have to have COVID controls, PPE, quarantine capabilities. With the emergency cleaning protocols, that really used to only be for hazardous spills, and that might be something that you know about with what you do, Agatha. But now it's not just hazardous spills, it's also confirmed cases, and it's deep cleaning and shutdowns and everything like that. Toolbox meetings, so you started the day meetings for people on site. Well, they now have to be staggered for density requirement and for shift staggers. Training was usually conducted in groups and in person, and now it's conducted virtually and individually. So for those that need that collaborative environment to learn, they're not actually getting that. And there's very limited face-to-face learning. I mean, all you have to do is look at university to see, with everyone learning from home, how many people are struggling to actually make it through that. And then you've got your work health and safety at home. Of course, that was only really required for flex workers and really wasn't a consideration before. but now it's required for every worker who is working from home, of which there are so many of us. And if their desk isn't set up properly and it's not compliant with working from home, with WHS, then your company could actually be liable for that, which is probably not something that was considered. And even though we've all got, work health safety insurance and you're through WorkSafe or Safe Work if you're in Adelaide, for instance, there's still some out-of-pocket expenses that need to be factored in. So making sure you've got those sort of plans in place to ensure people are working at appropriate locations is really important. Okay, so what I want to do now is just get an idea of what people think is going to come with us into the future, or what should come with us into the future, and what we'd like to leave behind. So one thing I'll get us started with is that I, for one, doubt business continuity will ever be the same again. I think that the changes that have been made to the way we all view business continuity will be everlasting. And I think pandemic management, which used to be the small subsection, will never ever be part of business continuity again. So whilst the plans must still work together harmoniously, one should be able to be activated without the other, and that's not really happened before. I think it's a good thing though. I think prior to the pandemic, BC plans were slightly limited in their functionality, as they really only catered for brief events. Having a plan that can be easily tailored to an event of any duration can only be a good thing for all businesses. So now I'm going to throw it over to you, ladies. What are your thoughts? What would you like to see carried forward, and what would you like to see left behind?
I think a slow, safe introduction to sort of what COVID normal will look like. I think we were sent home so quickly. It was just all so rushed and people were still recovering from that. I just think it has to be very well thought out, well planned, whatever,
Absolutely.
With, maybe consulting with people of what they're like, because I think people are coming from a place of a lot of anxiety, stress, worry. So how to deal with that? Don't just be told, well, you've got to go work from home or you've got to come to the office. Have consultants see what people would prefer, have some flexibility. I know that you've covered everything that our business is sort of mostly doing, because we quite quickly, the business seconded a business continuity manager, and he's supported by 2 consultants to deal with all of the things that you've covered.
Brilliant.
So they've been all prepared and they've been working through this planning. But I just think that it's great that they're planning, but I just hope we're just not told and all this information just flows down and that's what it is. I hope that, there is consultation and, both parties meet somewhere in between and see what that new COVID is coming from both sides, the employee and the employer. Otherwise, if it's rushed, if it's not done right, because businesses are, trying to cut costs or make up the production losses or whatever it may be, they're not going to recover as quickly if they've got a bunch of unhappy people.
No, I completely agree. I think that it's something that really needs to be very well thought out, as you're saying, because handing down a directive, like we all got the work from home directive, as you said, it was bang, everyone go home, don't come in again. And it was kind of, this might be for a couple of weeks. And that turned into a couple of months, and that's turned into a heck of a lot longer at this point, with no date of even considering when we're going to be returning to any sort of office environment. So I think that, as you say, it's really, really important to ensure that that consultation happens, because people are now used to working from home. They might want to stay working from home for a percentage of the time, or they may actually hate it and want to go back to the office. And it really needs to be that, as you said, that conversation of what works for you, what works for us, how do we make that all stick together? So I think
I agree.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on that. Sam, anything that you think should be carried forward or left behind?
I think the way we do emergency exercises.
Mhm.
The changes seem to, from our perspective, seem to work. Doing it a little differently, doing it virtually, it means that we're not waiting for people to get there, enter the room, which means we can start earlier, get them out of the way, gives us time to amend during as well. All that sort of stuff. I think that's a good change, and I think that should stay.
You know, I think you're right, and I think it will, because again, if we've got that option for people to work from home if they want to, then you still need your teams to be able to activate. So you're still going to have some sort of a video conferencing capability, and that's something that needs to be tested. So running an event that way will really highlight if there's any issues that need to be dealt with before something actually happens. Okay, so I'm going to thank everyone for joining us for some interesting conversation today. And I hope we got you thinking about something new or different, or thinking in a different way about what could potentially be coming next. Now, just as a reminder, there won't be a webinar next month, as it happens to coincide with Melbourne Cup Day over here, but we will be coming back to you in December. And we're going to present a little topic, but we're also hoping to make that a little more of an informal catch up, a pre-Christmas, share your ideas, discuss the issues that you have with the holiday period in your roles, and just have a bit of a discussion on that. Now, I'd like to invite everyone to hang around for an informal conversation afterwards. If you do have to run away, that's fine too, but we look forward to seeing you all in December.
See you. Bye.
Bye.
I've got to chuff off, sorry.
No, that's
That's all right.
fine.